It probably won't come as news to you that several negative stereotypes are associated with obesity. Being selfish, impulsive, less competent, and lacking in self-discipline are some examples highlighted by Poole and Hooer in 2009. But another, and maybe the most frequent of all, is laziness, defined as the quality of being unwilling to work or use energy. Laziness and physical inactivity are commonly used synonymously with each other, but it's worth pointing out that they aren't exactly the same thing. For example, someone could be willing to work or use energy, but still be physically inactive due to severe low back pain or some other debilitating injury. Nonetheless, if you ask someone with this stereotype precisely what they mean by lazy, what they'll actually mean most often is physically inactive. Therefore, we'll roughly equate both for this video. If you think about it, it's unsurprising how the stereotype of obese persons being lazy came to be. I mean, since laziness results in fewer calories used, and fewer calories used enhances the likelihood of weight gain, then you can imagine what leads people to this conclusion. And in fact, there does seem to be research proposing this. For example, one study of 111,851 people found that obese persons were at a 52% higher likelihood of being physically inactive than those of normal weight. That's not to say that all obese persons are lazy, of course, just that the population may be at a higher chance of being over those of a normal weight category. Nevertheless, could it be that for many of the concerning individuals, that laziness is instead a consequence of obesity than a cause? Today we'll explain our reasoning behind this. But first, as always, please take note of our disclaimer. The first reason is simply down to obese persons having to carry an extra load everywhere they go. Just imagine how much more sedentary you'd be if you put even a 20-pound weight vest on you, never mind a 100-pound one. However, it's true that obese persons will also develop extra musculature in turn to help move around the increased fat stores. For instance, did you know that sumo wrestlers have more overall muscle mass than bodybuilders? You just can't see it due to the overlying body fat. So from a strength perspective, the extra load mightn't cause as many problems in that regard. Still, it may well contribute to laziness from a cardiorespiratory standpoint. One study investigating the link between VO2 max, an important measure of cardiorespiratory capacity of individuals, and body fat, found that increased body fat was associated with decreased levels of it. Moreover, another variable that may add to this decline in aerobic capacity, leading us to our second reason why laziness can be a consequence of obesity, is the higher susceptibility of iron deficiency. But to explain why, we need to explain what iron deficiency is. In our blood, there are three main categories of cells: platelets, white blood cells, and red blood cells. Platelets aid in blood clotting, white blood cells combat infection, and red blood cells transport oxygen to various bodily regions and return carbon dioxide to be exhaled. Now, for red blood cells in particular here, iron is very important. This is because red blood cells contain a protein known as hemoglobin, which requires high amounts of iron to allow them to do their job optimally. As a result, in iron-lacking persons, less oxygen can be transferred to their lungs and muscles, and ultimately, the ability to be physically active is hindered. So why is this of relevance for obesity then? Well, obese persons have been found to be a lot more likely to have iron deficiency than the average person. For instance, one study demonstrated that obese women had a 45.6% prevalence of iron deficiency versus 23.5% in those of a normal weight status. In comparison, another study showed that obese men had a 21.7% prevalence of the condition against 13.6% in those of normal weight status. The exact reason for this gap hasn't been determined. You might think it's from poorer dietary decisions that limit adequate iron intake, but the researchers believe that it's rather down to the difference in fat tissue quantity. Keep in mind that fat tissue isn't just passive energy storage. In fact, it's actually considered an endocrine organ because it secretes a lot of hormones into our bodies. And it's one of these hormones, hepcidin, that's thought to be the key player involved in preventing the uptake of iron in the intestines. Next is the higher susceptibility for pain. If you've ever had the misfortune of dealing with a musculoskeletal problem, you'll know how much it can incline you to limit things functionally. Well, just imagine how difficult this can be for obese people, who are often battling multiple simultaneously. For instance, they have been found to be at an increased risk of 560% for plantar fasciitis, 235% for jaw disorders, 190% for general tendinopathies, 170% for fibromyalgia, 136% for low back pain, and also at an increased significant risk for shin splints and various areas of osteoarthritis. There are several reasons for this, outside of the increased load placed on the musculoskeletal system. One is that, going back to the fact that fat is metabolically active, it also secretes C-reactive protein, leptin, interleukin 6, and tumor necrosis factor A, all of which may induce pain via inflammation. Others are from the negative changes in blood circulation and insulin resistance that arise, as well as poorer posture and biomechanics. Additionally, it's also worth pointing out that depression is higher in obese persons, which is relevant since depression can worsen people's pain tolerance, and depression itself is associated with physical inactivity. A systematic review and meta-analysis found that obese persons had a 55% increased risk of developing depression over time. On top of all this, obesity is associated with higher levels of kinesiophobia too, meaning a fear of injury from certain movements, probably because of the proneness to musculoskeletal disorders and higher pain severity pointed out in part. And finally, we have anxiety. At some point in our lives, everybody will have experienced it to a certain extent, whether it be from doing a presentation, showing up to a job interview, or just from meeting new people. But certain populations are more inclined to be anxious than others. For obese individuals, in particular, they've been suggested to have a 30% increased likelihood of an anxiety disorder and 40% for anxiety symptoms. One of the main causes for this higher likelihood is said to be due to the negative stereotypes associated with obesity that we pointed out at the onset, as they can be deeply distressing for people who've repeatedly experienced them firsthand. In one study, 76 obese individuals spoke about anxiety as a barrier to physical activity by way of open-ended interviews conducted in Victoria, Australia. One woman spoke about how she felt so ashamed and embarrassed about showing off her body when it came to swimming that she wore long track pants and a sweatshirt so she wouldn't have to reveal so much of her body to others. While another mentioned that to avoid people seeing her when she was out for a walk, she'd only hit the local streets at 5 a.m. when it was dark. So overall, considering the factors highlighted, this is why for many laziness or physical inactivity could be a consequence of obesity rather than a cause. On a side note, if you are interested in undertaking our evidence-based and results-backed personalised Plato weight management program, please click the link in the top right-hand corner of the video or follow the link in the description. Nevertheless, some might argue that it's laziness that led the relevant obese persons to these consequences in the first place. But you've got to remember that physical inactivity is only one of a plethora of determinants for body weight. The Foresight report conducted in 2007 lays this out in great detail. Indeed, as you can see, someone's level of physical activity is one of the 7 main determinants of obesity outlined by the report. So again, to be clear, we aren't contending that laziness isn't the cause of obesity, as it absolutely can be a significant contributor. Just that there are another 6 main determinants equally as important a consideration, each one of which further containing numerous sub-determinants. As such, this goes to show the possibility of someone becoming obese, even if they're regularly active. So, to conclude, when it comes to obesity and laziness, remember that correlation does not equal causation. In other words, just because laziness or physical inactivity is indeed linked to obesity in the literature, it doesn't necessarily mean it's always a cause. It's important to keep in mind that there are many other determinants of body weight besides how active we are, and not to overlook the physical and mental consequences of obesity, since they can substantially facilitate sedentary behaviour. Do you agree with us? We'd love to hear from you in the comment section down below. Additionally, if you're new here, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel. So that has been our video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.